draw your attention to. So you see, now when you want to execute, when you want to perform a motor function, okay, so the thing first initiate in the primary motor. See, the premotor area, primary motor area is the area that will do the execution, right? Now, I wonder if you are familiar with this one. Let me do some drawing here. Let me do, okay, let me do the pen. So if you are familiar with the cerebral cortex, so you see this is cerebral cortex, right? So if I draw a line like this, why the line is not drawn? Okay, so if I draw a line like this, this is called, not this one, sorry, this is the one. So if I draw a line like this is called central sulcus, okay? Now, anterior to the front of the central sulcus, this one is called gyrus, right? So the brain, if you look at the brain tissue, as I said, I will take you to the lab one day that you will see the brain and hold it. So you see there are some ridges like elevated areas, we call them gyri, and then there are some depressed area like this. You see the depression, we call sulci, okay? There are some very important sulci in the brain. So like most important one for our understanding today is this one. You see, this one we call it central sulcus, that divide the brain into an anterior front, which is called the frontal lobe, and behind this is the parietal lobe, right? Now, anterior to the central sulcus, this is called the precentral gyrus, and this is the postcentral gyrus. This is the area for all sensation. All our somatic sensation, not all sensation, I should say, it's just somatic sensation, because a auditory sensation, visual sensation, they end up in a different place. Now, all the somatic sensation, they end up in this area. We call this one primary somatic area, somatosensory area. This is the gyrus name is postcentral gyrus, because this is behind the central sulcus, right? Postcentral gyrus, this is sensory area. But anterior to this one, and front of this one, central sulcus, is the precentral gyrus. That is the primary motor area. So all motor, commands, they eventually come from this area. Okay, we call it primary motor area. But for any motor execution that start from here, we need some planning actually for those motor areas, right? So in addition to this, so this is our primary motor area, right? So in between those two red lines, this is our primary motor area, right? This is the primary motor area. Okay. Now, in addition to that, we have an area around here on the frontal lobe like this. This is called the premotor cortex, this area, premotor cortex. That is for planning, okay? And then there is another area here. It is called the supplementary motor area, premotor area, supplementary motor area, right? Now, we said all execution will be from here, right? Precentral gyrus. So what the premotor area or supplementary motor area is doing, they will be planning the action. So what are you trying to do? They will plan the movement, and then when they finish planning, they will send the information here, the premotor area. Premotor area will now do the execution. Okay, so directly, if you see, to execute a motor function, you need to do it through a muscle, right? Through a skeletal muscle, which is a voluntary muscle. Now, for voluntary muscles are all connected to this area, the fibers that are originating in this area. So they will get their order eventually from the motor area, primary motor area. But for them, for that to happen, you see, the action should be planned around here. We call it premotor cortex. Now, why we have another area, supplementary motor cortex? Because when you see the motor area, there are some motor functions which are very skilled, right? If we do something with the fingers, like writing, playing piano, or do a violin, see, those are very fine action, right? Or we are speaking, as I am talking now, lot of muscles are working together. Muscles of larynx, my muscles of tongue, my lips are moving, there is a facial expression. So there is it's not just one. You see only one, I am talking. So which muscle is responsible for talking? If you give a one sentence answer, you see the muscles of the larynx. They are the ones producing the sound. But for sound to make sense, my lip should move properly, my facial muscle should move properly. They are all the actions buried under the main action. So all you see is the muscles of larynx. All you give credit to only muscles of larynx. But in addition to muscles of larynx, so many other things are working on the background, right? So that detailed plan will be made here in the premotor area, and then it goes to the basal ganglia as well. I have a class on basal ganglia, so I will talk about it. So basal ganglia will do the calculation or computation of all those repetitive movements. It's just not like one movement from right to left or left to the right. There are a lot of repetitive movements, right? Even for walking, talking, for all those fine motor activity. So to this area, premotor area and the supplementary motor area will do the planning. Now, premotor area will do the planning for the muscles which are involved in fine response. Like we call them distal muscles, like the muscles of the hand, like leg muscles. You don't need that fine activity in leg muscles, right? Now, why, if you want to climb something, you don't need very fine action. So those are mainly the muscles of the back and the muscles of the trunk. Those are more proximal muscles. The distal muscles are the ones that are mainly involved in the finer movement. Okay. Now, this area will plan the movement for we call them distal muscles, which are involved in fine activity. And the supplementary motor area will plan for the action of those muscles which are involved in, which are also important, right? Say like you are sitting down, you want to stand up. So that is not a fine movement. So mainly the muscles of your back and muscles of your trunk will contract. But those doesn't involve any fine activity. So those will be planned by supplementary motor area, and the fine movements are planned in the premotor area. But this is just planning. For coordination, they will go to other areas as well. Now, if we go back to this one here, you see before for a primary motor area, this one, to perform a function, you see the first of all premotor area will do the planning, and then they will send the information to basal ganglia and cerebellum. I will talk about both basal ganglia and cerebellum on a later class. You will know exactly what they do. But to know that it doesn't go directly to primary motor area. Premotor area will do the planning. They will go through the basal ganglia, they will go to the cerebellum, and then eventually they will come to the primary motor area or in the brainstem. And eventually from there, the signal will go eventually to the muscle to perform the action. Okay. We will go into little detail of it. This is just like a basic information. The point that after all these things, the point that you need to understand is that even though we have a primary motor area here, and they are the ones who will do the final execution, but before the final execution, there are a lot of steps involved in a fine motor activity. Okay, so that is the ultimate fact that you have to remember. Okay, so now what are the other brain areas? They are involved in planning and all those calculation, computation. That is the premotor area is one area they will plan, and that plan will go to basal ganglia. They will do the computation, for the repetitive movement or sequence of movements. And why you need cerebellum? The cerebellum you will need because for a part of the body to move, you need to know what is the initial position of that part, right? If I want to touch something, if I touch something which is located above, then to do this movement, my brain, my cerebral cortex need to know what is the initial position of my hand, right? So for an example, like if I ask you to touch your nose, say I ask you to touch the tip of your nose, you can do it by keeping your eyes closed, right? Why can you do that? Because even if your eyes are closed, you exactly know what is the location of your tip of your nose. So you touch the tip of your nose. So now, if your eyes are open, I ask okay, so one more time. So if you ask me to touch the tip of my nose, my eyes are open now, I can see and I can do it, right? Now, if I keep my eyes closed and even if I move from my place, right, still I can touch the tip of my nose keeping my eyes closed. Why? Because even if I move and even if my eyes are closed, my body knows where the position of other parts of the body. How we will know that? How our brain will know that? Our brain will be getting information from cerebellum continuously about the position, relative position of our different parts of the body. Now, if we do the same experiment with you, I ask you to touch the tip of my nose. So you can do that, right? Now, if I say, keep your eyes closed, now touch the tip of my nose and I move a little bit, you cannot do that because my cerebellum will feed information to my cerebral cortex where the tip of my nose is. As long as your eyes are open, you can see and you can touch. But while your eyes are closed and I move, can you do that? You cannot, because your body, your brain doesn't know where the tip of my nose is, but my body knows it. How come? Who is giving this information? That information is given to my cerebral cortex by the cerebellum. So, if you think if something is above, I want to touch something which is above, right? Now, if my hand is here, movement will be one, right? But if my hands are on the side, you have to do different movements, right? That is one thing. So you need to know where the position of your other parts of the body, that is one. And number two is, you see, I am grabbing the stuff, right? I am grabbing the stuff with my hand. Then you can see only my hand is grabbing something. But we ignore the fact that just for my hand to move there, lot of other muscles are working. So what you can do, you can try. You can grab something, that is the only thing. So you want to grab your pen, you want to grab your notebook, whatever you do, all importance are given to the hand, what is grabbing it. But on the background, you see the tension of this area is changing, tension of these muscles are changing, tension of these muscles are changing. Tension, if you have to move, tension of your back muscles are changing as well. But we ignore all those because they all happen in the background. So some part of the area of the brain need to work, actually need to make sure that all those background things are working properly. If they don't, you cannot do it. Similarly, like with keeping your eyes closed, you cannot touch my tip of my nose if I move, but you can do your own because you know where exactly your hand is, where your tip of your finger is, and where your tip of the nose is, right? Okay. So now let's move from there. Okay. Okay. So if we move, okay.
Dr. Syed?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the last unit, we talked about how sensory information traveled. It was like afferent. So would it be correct to think about it as the sensory information traveling up, and then this is the next step of it traveling down and executing those movements?
Yes. So not you see, some of the responses will be in response to sensory stimulus, right? For an example, so you say you touch something, that is, say you are looking for something in a dark room and you touch something which is maybe end up touching something sharp that is painful, right? Now when you touch something painful, this pain sensation will be carried by the ascending tracts to your sensory area, right? Now sensory area will communicate with the motor area. Motor area will know that your finger is touching something which is painful. Now if you keep, like if it is not something, if it is something hot, you need to move your finger out of that area, right? Otherwise, if you keep your finger in that hot surface, you may end up burning your finger, right? Now for that to happen, but if your motor function is gone, if your finger is motor function is gone of your finger, but your sensory is intact, you will feel the pain. You will feel the pain as your tip of your finger is burning, but you cannot withdraw your finger from there, because to withdraw your finger from there, you need the motor system to work, right? Now how the motor system will work? So this, when the pain stimulus reaches the brain, the brain decide that if the finger stays there, it will be damaging. So as a protective phenomena, as a protective action, The motor system will calculate an event and send this information to this muscle, and then the muscle it will not send this muscle to this one. It will send muscle information to the whole hand actually. So the whole hand will move away. We call it a withdrawal response. So because withdrawal response are always in response to a painful stimulus, you withdraw from there. Say as you are walking, if you are walking barefooted, if you step on something which is painful, sharp, you don't step further on that one, right? You withdraw your leg from there. How it happens? As the sensation goes to the brain decide that the motor area decide that if you step on if you keep your step there and firmly, then it will be much more painful. It will be damaging to the body. So the motor system send signal to the muscle of the leg so that you withdraw your leg from that painful stimulus. That is one thing. But not all motor response are initiated by a sensory stimulus. This is an example of how a sensory stimulus is initiating a motor response. But there are sometimes it's not a sensory stimulus. Of course, there is a sensory stimulus. Say like you need to write something, right? You are sitting on your desk. So you need to grab your pen. So you move your hand. So you move your hand to grab the pen, or you move your hand to grab the notebook to write something, right? That is not in response to a sensory stimulus. That is your plan. You want to write something, so you need to grab a pen, you need to grab a note, and then you start writing. All these are because, you see, brain, this intention, what you are intending, that information also goes from thalamus, goes from cerebellum to your cerebral cortex. Thalamus know your intention, what you are planning to do. Say you sit on a table, right? You still didn't do anything, but your plan is to write something. Cerebellum will send that information to cerebral cortex that she want to write something. For that to happen, she need to grab the pen, grab the notebook, and start writing. That information goes from cerebellum to the cerebral cortex. Now cerebral cortex start planning, premotor area start planning. So for planning, you need supplementary motor area because you need some background tone on some muscle. And the premotor area will start planning because you need some fine movements. They will send those information to the cerebral cortex, right? To the primary motor area. Primary motor area will consult with the basal ganglia to finally sequence the events actually. So, it's not that your one leg, say like you are walking, very coordinated, right? Your right foot, left, right, left, that's how you go. If you do twice right, can you walk properly? So those are all sequences are very well computed, and those are done in the basal ganglia. And then basal ganglia will say, okay, that is, so who is telling about the intention to the cerebral cortex? That is done by cerebellum. Now, premotor cortex, they plan the movement. Now they consult the basal ganglia. Am I doing it right? And then that is what I want to do. That is the plan. So sequence the events. So basal ganglia will sequence the events, and they will send the information to the primary motor area. Now primary motor area will be the final execution. They will send the information to the involved muscle, the muscles that are required for this fine movement. Okay, so that's how a motor thing will work. Now, so most important, the motor, the descending tracts, the tracts or the bundle of nerve fibers that carry signal from periphery to the brain, we call them ascending tracts, right? Because they are going up with the signal. Now, for the motor, it's exactly opposite. It is coming down with the signal. So we call them descending tracts. Now, most important descending tracts that you have to know is called the corticospinal tract. Okay, corticospinal. So from the name, you can have a guess, which means it is coming from the cortex and going all the way to your spinal cord, right? That's how it gets its name, corticospinal tract. Now, corticospinal tract means what? It will carry signal from the cerebral cortex and go all the way. Now here you see it's coming to the spinal cord, right? From spinal cord, what will happen? Spinal cord, a signal will go and it will go to a muscle, right? It will go to a muscle and the muscle will perform the job, right? Okay, so it's coming to the muscle, right? So why we call it corticospinal? Because it begin at the cortex and end in the spinal cord. So how it is coming through different areas of the brain, I will talk in another class, but it is originating in the motor area and it is coming down all the way to the spinal cord. We call it corticospinal because from cortex to the spinal cord, and then from there another nerve will begin, and that will carry the information to the muscle involved, and the muscle will contract. Okay. Okay, so now, now even though we have a primary motor area, all the fibers that are coming, if you look at the bundle of fibers of the corticospinal tract, they are very important tract, most important descending tract that will do the final execution. Okay, now if you look at all the fibers that are contained in the corticospinal tract, interestingly, only 30% of them, they arise from the primary motor area. Okay, so our expectation will be what? Most of the fibers, if not all, should be coming from the primary motor area, which gyra is it? Precentral gyrus, right? Because post-central gyrus was the sensory area. Precentral gyrus is the primary motor area, right? Oh, okay. So, but in reality, if we look at all the nerve fibers that are contained in the corticospinal tract, we see only 30% of them, they arise from the primary motor area. Okay, so if we go back to the previous slide, if you look at this one, so this is the primary motor area, right? Which sulcus is this one? What is this sulcus called? This is called central sulcus, central sulcus. And which area is this behind the central sulcus? This is the sensory area, primary somatosensory area. We call it, this gyrus we call post-central gyrus because it is behind the central sulcus, right? And this one is in the front of central sulcus. We call it pre-central gyrus. And this is the primary motor area. This is the primary sensory area. Now, we said the corticospinal tract that begin in the cortex goes all the way down to the spinal cord. Will only 30% of the fibers will arise from here. So like this is the primary motor area, right? So this will contribute 30% of the fibers, okay? And the remaining 30% will come from these two areas, premotor area and supplementary motor area, right? So 30%. Now 60% of the fibers of the corticospinal tract will arise from the sensory area. You see, even though this is a sensory area, but 60% of the fibers. So you can imagine how important is the input of the sensory area for a motor function. Okay. Now let's go back here. So we said this is the corticospinal tract. Now, if we look at the fiber tracts, all the fibers in this tract, where do they originate from? 30% of them originate from the primary motor area. 30% of them originate from the premotor area or supplementary motor area, and 60% of them arise from the sensory area. Okay, that form the corticospinal tract, and corticospinal tract coming through all the areas. I will talk about this again. And then look at this one. At what stage? This is the medulla. Okay, at the lower medulla, these fibers, this was coming from this side, right? This is the, so okay, so this side, and then look at what happened in the medulla. Most of the fibers, they are going to the opposite side. Do you remember this type of decussation we saw in the sensory system as well? Do you remember the decussation in the sensory system? Okay, so now in this case, corticospinal fibers, 90% of the fibers, okay, 90% of the fibers will decussate and they will go to the other side. Now you see they end up in this side. They were on this side. Instead, they decussate in the lower medulla, and then after decussation, they are ending in the lateral white column. So this is the lateral column. This is the dorsal column. This is the anterior column, right? Do you remember we said dorsal column, medial lemniscus system, spinothalamic tract, and you know the fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus? Those were here. This is the lateral column. So these fibers, after crossing to the opposite side, they occupy the lateral column in the spinal cord. That's why we call it lateral corticospinal tract. Okay. Now we said 90% of the fiber will decassate. What does it mean? 10% of the fiber will still remain on the same side, right? Those 10% which will not cross and they stay on the same side, they will occupy the anterior column. We call them anterior corticospinal tract. They will also eventually move on the same level, and then they will go to the muscle as well. Okay. Second order neuron will start from here. They will go to the muscle. Okay. Now, so 10% of the fibers will form anterior corticospinal tract, and 90% of the fiber will go to the other side, and they will occupy the lateral column of the spinal cord. They will form the lateral corticospinal tract. Okay. Now, lateral corticospinal, so both of them are innervating muscle. So what is the difference? Anterior corticospinal tract will innervate the muscle that are not involved in fine movement. They will be involved in bilateral movement of the axial skeleton. Okay, like the muscle of the back, muscle of the center. Okay. No, not distal muscle, right? And lateral corticospinal tract will innervate the distal muscles, the muscles that are involved in fine response. Okay. Now, is it clear to you why we are calling this one lateral corticospinal tract and this one we are calling anterior corticospinal tract? Based on what? Why this one is lateral corticospinal? Why this is anterior corticospinal? Are you clear about that one? How we are naming them? We are calling that one lateral corticospinal because that occupy the lateral white column of the spinal cord, and this one occupy the anterior white column of the spinal cord. That's how the name came, anterior corticospinal or lateral corticospinal. Now, what is the another very important difference? For the lateral corticospinal tract, the fibers decassate at the level of medulla, right? But anterior corticospinal tract, they stay in the same side, occupying the anterior white column, and they cross to the opposite side only at the level where they will go to the muscle. They also decassate, right? At what level they decassate? They decassate at the level of the spinal cord where they eventually connect to the other muscles, the second neuron. Are you clear about these 2 points? This is vital. This is something that you have to remember. Okay. Now I will bring a very important concept. Maybe that's all I will do today. I will not go any further. Now, you see, as we said, there are two neurons involved here, right? One began at the cortex, came all the way to the spinal cord, and then second neuron began from there and going to the muscle. The first one we call upper motor neuron, okay? The first one, upper motor neuron coming from the top, from the cortex. And this one, which is the final pathway, which is forming the final pathway, we call it lower motor neuron. Okay, so now, this is a very important concept we have to understand. Even though I am calling the corticospinal tract as the only upper motor neuron, right? Corticospinal tract is the upper motor neuron, and the nerve that is going from the spinal cord to the muscle is the lower motor neuron, right? Now, upper motor neuron can be of different types. That is something I want to make clear. Now, not all the fibers, okay? So this is coming from the cortex, right? Upper motor neurons, they can have two types of origin. They may either origin from cortex or they may have subcortical origins. Okay. Now, those which originate in the cortex, they are again two types. Okay, let me bring it here. Okay. Now, see, some of the fibers will come. Do you remember we have some muscle? We talk about the cranial nerves, right? Some of the cranial nerves will innervate our muscle, will innervate skeletal muscle, right? Our tongue muscle is innervated by which nerve innervate the tongue muscle, skeletal muscle of the tongue? Which nerve is it? Which cranial is it? It is hypoglossal, right? Hypoglossal. So do you think hypoglossal will come all the way to the spinal cord and then go? No. Hypoglossal will stay around here in the brainstem, and they will come, their fibers will originate from the cerebral cortex, and then around here in the brainstem, it's not exactly the place, and then they will go to the muscle. They will go to see like the tongue muscle, okay? They go to the tongue muscle. So for them, upper motor neuron is, if we say upper motor neuron, this is not the corticospinal, because they didn't come all the way to the spinal cord. They stayed within the brainstem. Do you know what are the parts they form the brainstem? What are the parts of the brain that we call brainstem? Oh, that's important. Brainstem is the part of, you see, we have forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain, right? Forebrain includes cerebral cortex, and midbrain is a small area of the brain just below the forebrain, and the hindbrain include pons and medulla. Okay. Now, midbrain, pons, and medulla, these three parts together we call them brainstem. So most of the cranial nerve nuclei, they are located in the brainstem, which means if this is a hypoglossal nerve, which hypoglossal is the 12th cranial, right? So that will arise from the brain, and it will come to the hypoglossal nerve nucleus, which is located in the brainstem. This is midbrain, okay? It's not the brainstem. It will come to the brainstem, and then from there, the second neuron will begin. So this is the second order neuron, lower motor neuron, and this is the first order neuron, right? Upper motor neuron. Upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron. But this upper motor neuron didn't even reach the spinal cord. It came down only up to the brainstem, and from there, second order neuron is gone, right? So this upper motor neuron is the cortical origin, right? So cortical origin, there are two types. One we call corticospinal. Oh, I don't know whether you can read this. It's a corticospinal, right? See, it's corticospinal. And the other one, of the cranial nerve, this one, we call it corticonuclear. It's not cranial nerve, it's corticonuclear. Because this fiber, why we call it corticospinal? Because it began as cortex and went all the way to the spinal cord. We call it corticospinal. Now this one begin at cortex, didn't go to the spinal cord. Can we call it corticospinal? We cannot call it corticospinal because it didn't even reach the spinal cord. How much it came? It came to a brainstem nuclei. So we call it corticonuclear. So this corticonuclear is the upper motor neuron, and this nerve, that is hypoglossal nerve, that is eventually going to the tongue, we call this one a lower motor neuron. Okay. Now, cortical origin, and there are some with subcortical origin. I will talk about them later. I don't want to get into that one. Lower motor neuron is the final neuron that is eventually innervating the nerve, right? So you see, this is the lower motor neuron, this is lower motor neuron, this is lower motor neuron. So where are the lower motor neuron begin and where do they end? Lower motor neuron, they begin in the central nervous system, either in the spinal cord or in the brainstem, right? They either begin in the spinal cord or they begin in the brainstem. Either way, if we give them a common name, what name we can give them? We can call them, they begin in the CNS, right? Central nervous system. And where do they end up to? They end up in the skeletal muscle. Okay. Now let's get back to again the upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. Upper motor neuron are the neurons that originate in the upper brain area, okay, or some subcortical area as well, and then they go all the way either to the spinal cord or they remain in the brainstem. That is the upper motor neuron. Lower motor neuron will begin from somewhere, either spinal cord or the brainstem, whatever you call it. It's a part of central nervous system, and they will eventually go to the muscle that will ultimately perform the function. So that is the lower motor neuron. Now, why we want to know about why we make a big deal of upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron? upper motor neuron will always have an inhibitory, influence on the lower motor neuron. Okay, now for an example, if this is the lower motor neuron, right? Now, if I cut this upper motor neuron here, you will see the effect of this nerve on this muscle will be exaggerated. It will do too much, because upper motor neuron, not only it carry the information from the center to the nerve, it always exert an inhibitory effect on the lower motor neuron as well. So that you will see when we go further, we'll talk about them. So now the thing is that the most important descending tracts is the corticospinal. Corticospinal means what? They will begin in the cortex and they will end in the spinal cord, right? Corticospinal. Simple. That is the most important descending tracts. If you forget about all other descending tracts, remember one, please don't ever forget corticospinal tract. Now, corticospinal, where are the fibers of corticospinal tract originating from? 30% of the fibers are originating from the primary motor area, 30% originating from premotor area and supplementary motor area, 40% originating from the sensory area. Now the fibers are coming down, and how far they will come down? Corticospinal, so they have to come down to spinal cord. Okay, now in the spinal cord, which area they will occupy will determine their name. If they occupy the lateral column of the final position, if their final position is the lateral column of the spinal cord, we call it lateral corticospinal. If they occupy the anterior white column of the spinal cord, we call it anterior corticospinal. Now, what are the other two different, except for the location in the spinal cord, what is the other very important difference between those two? The most of the fibers, 90% of the fibers of the corticospinal are lateral corticospinal. So where do those fibers decussate? They decussate in the lower medulla. Okay. Now remaining 10%, which do not decussate, they descend without decussating in the lower medulla. They stay on the same side. Where do they eventually decussate? They eventually decussate at the level where they will reach the muscle. Okay. So for this one, for this muscle, lateral corticospinal, it decussated in the medulla and then came to the spinal cord, and then from the spinal cord, lower motor neuron begin and goes to the muscle. And this one, it remained on the same side. It didn't cross in the medulla. It stayed in the same side. But if it has to go from here to the muscle, at that level, it will decussate. And now, functionally, what is the difference between the lateral corticospinal and anterior corticospinal tract? Lateral corticospinal tract will innervate the distal muscle, the muscles which are involved in fine movement. That is the function of lateral corticospinal. What type of muscle the anterior corticospinal tract will innervate? Anterior corticospinal tract will innervate the muscle, the axial muscle, right? We call them proximal muscle. They are not involved in fine response. They are involved in more like, gross response, like from standing to sitting down, from sitting to stand up, and and also for you to walk, or for you to draw something very fine, even though your fine finger, these are the ones, or you play a violin or piano, so these are the fine movement, right? But do you think you can do the fine movement if you don't have a proper tone on your shoulder muscle? You have to do that. So those background things are done by the proximal muscle, or we call them axial muscles, right? These are proximal ones. They are not involved in fine response, but they help in the fine response of the distal muscles. So those muscles will be innervated by anterior corticospinal, and the muscles which are involved in fine response, they will be innervated by lateral corticospinal tract. Now, let me stop here, and I want to make sure that we understood this much so that we can move further. Anybody have any question?
Could we go back a slide for a second?
Sure. Mhm.
So I'm just a little bit confused about the fibers. So if there's 30%, 30%, and 60%,
Mhm.
like I'm not understanding the total, I guess, because it seems to me to be
Oh, sorry. I that is my math problem. It's 40% actually. Oh, you are good in math.
a chat.
So you got an understanding of my math capability, right? That's very good. So it is like, so, and also you see, if you look at different text, you may not see 30, 30, 40. I just made it round. In some places you will see 35, 25, it's a 40, something like that. But a round figure, if I just round up the figure, it will be something like that, 30% from the primary motor area. But when I studied it first, my major confusion was, this is the primary motor area, and this is the one that is sending the command. How come only 30% of the fibers of the total 100% is arising from the primary motor area? That make good sense that it will, some of the fibers definitely have to arise from premotor area or supplementary motor area. But at the beginning, it was difficult for me to make sense that 40% of the fibers were coming from the sensory area. So that form all the fibers of corticospinal tract, right? Okay. Now, of the corticospinal tract, how many of them decussate in the lower border of the medulla? What percentage? What percentage of fibers of the corticospinal tract that decussate at the level of medulla?
90%?
About 90%. Good. So we usually we don't make this number very rigid. We don't say 90%, we say about 90%. So it could be 85%, could be 92%, that's fine. But about 90% of the fibers, they decussate in the lower part of the medulla. Why it is important to know exactly where they're decussating? Because when we will talk about the damage to the spinal cord or in the brainstem, and if you have a damage, so before they decussate, if you have a damage to the brainstem area or in the area of the brain, in the area of the in the corticospinal tract fibers, they will cause paralysis of the same side. But before, after crossing, you lose the problem, you lose the muscles of the right side, but your problem on the brain was on the left side, right? So that's why it is important to understand the point of decussation. Okay, good. So we said out of this 100% of the corticospinal fibers, 90% of them will decussate in the lower medulla. Lower medulla means what? Before the spinal cord, right? After the lower medulla, what part will start? Medulla will continue as spinal cord, right? The continuation of the medulla is the spinal cord. But spinal cord will continue from the cervical level, from below the medulla, all the way to the lumbar level, right? L2, L3, L1, L2, that is where spinal cord will end. So from there, some fibers which will innervate the muscles of the upper limb, they will end in the cervical segment of the spinal cord, and then they will go to the muscle, right? But those who are designed to, who are destined to innervate the muscles of the lower limb, they will go, those corticospinal tract fibers are much longer, right? They will go all the way down to the lower part of the spinal cord, which is about lumbar 1, lumbar 2. And then from there, the fibers will go. So you can imagine all corticospinal tract fibers will not be the same length, right? Because all of them will originate from the cortex. Now, some of them will come to the cervical level of the spinal cord, and then their lower motor neuron will go out from there. But the one which is innervating my leg muscle, the corticospinal fibers will go all the way down to the lumbar region of my spinal cord, and then from there lower motor neuron will arise, which means they are not all of them will be of same length. Okay, now 90% is gone. They decussate in the lower border of the medulla, and they continue on the lateral white column of the spinal cord, and they will continue in the spinal cord, right? Go down as far as they need to go, depending on what is their target. Okay, so what will happen to the remaining 10% of the fibers? what will happen to the 10% of the fibers who didn't decussate in the lower border of the medulla? What will happen to them? Okay, let me make it simple. Which white column of the spinal cord will they be positioned?
So won't they be in the anterior part and they'll
Good.
travel down to the
Yeah,
second order?
they will be in the anterior white column, right? They will be in the anterior. See, this is the anterior white column, this is the dorsal white column, this is the lateral white column, right? Are you familiar with those terms when we say anterior, posterior, medial, lateral, dorsal, ventral, because in anatomy we use those terms so much. I sometimes I thought it's not even necessary to tell you what is anterior, posterior, but if you are not everybody is familiar with the anatomy terms. So anyway, anything in the front we say anterior. Anything in the back, we say posterior. But then again, when we talk about the neuro, we say anterior, we sometimes say rostral. Rostral means towards nose. Caudal means towards tail. And the lateral means on the side. Lateral is okay. Or lateral is always on the side. Okay. And medial is towards the midline. Medial is towards the midline. Lateral is away from the midline. Front is ventral or anterior, back is posterior or dorsal. Okay, so now this is back, so this is dorsal, this is front, so this is anterior, these are laterals, right? Now look at this one, this is what? This is definitely lateral, right? And this is definitely anterior. So the fibers that are positioned in the anterior white column, they are anterior corticospinal. And the ones that are occupying the lateral column, they are lateral corticospinal. That's simple, right? Oh, still difficult? Some confusing face that make me nervous actually. Okay, now if you look at from the cortex all the way to the muscle, we say there are two neurons involved in that. One neuron will bring the signal from the cortex either to the spinal nerve nucleus. We call them corticonuclear fibers, right? Or they will start from the cortex all the way down to the spinal cord. We say corticospinal fibers. Now, corticospinal and corticonuclear, both of them, we call them upper motor neuron. And then either from the cranial nerve nucleus or from the spinal cord, the second neuron will begin and they will go to the muscle. From here to the muscle. We call them lower motor neuron. Are you clear about upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron? Good. That's all I wanted to achieve today, okay? So, and then again, we say, so now why some of the nerves, again, I told you once, but let me repeat. So why some of the fibers, upper motor neuron, coming all the way to the spinal cord or corticospinal fibers make corticospinal tract, why others end up in the brainstem? Because you see cranial nerves, we have 12 pair of cranial nerves. Do you remember? I said that will not be in the exam and you deleted it from your system. Don't do that. So of course, I will not ask you a question about that one, but just keep it in your, in a long-term memory, just somewhere in the system, that there are 12 pair of cranial nerves. Like most obvious one that you all see, the muscles of facial expression. Which nerve innervate it's easiest to answer. What is the cranial nerve that innervate the muscles of facial expression? You have to answer this one.
The facial nerve.
Good. That is smart. You see, you don't even have to know it. You know facial, which will control the muscles of facial expression, right? Good. So now all these cranial nerves, they don't come down to the level of spinal cord. They have their nuclei located in the brainstem. Again, brainstem are three things, right? Three things make the brainstem: midbrain, pons, and medulla. Together we call brainstem. And most of the cranial nerve nuclei are located in the brainstem. So from there, the final nerve will come out, which is the lower motor neuron. So where those upper motor neuron will end, they will begin in the cortex. Beginning is the same, cortico is same, but instead of being spinal, they end in the cranial nerve nuclei. Where are they located? They are located in the brainstem. So we call it corticonuclear fiber because we cannot call them corticospinal because they don't even go to the spinal cord. So we call them corticonuclear. Now, if you look at some text, they sometimes, the nuclei that are coming from the medulla, which is a part of brainstem, they call them, they form a bulb actually of the medulla. They say corticobulbar fibers. But corticobulbar fibers and corticonuclear fibers, they are exactly same. To be on the safe side, we will call them corticonuclear because in that case, we can cover the nuclei which are located in the pons. We can cover the nuclei which are located in the midbrain. We can cover the nuclei which are located in the medulla. All of them we can call corticonuclear. So corticonuclear fibers, are they upper motor neuron or the lower motor neuron? Corticonuclear. For any, okay, let me give you a tip. For a nerve to qualify as a lower motor neuron, they have to end in the muscle. They have to go all the way to the muscle, that the muscle that will be moving. So corticonuclear, does it qualify as a lower motor neuron? No, because by the name you know it, corticonuclear, beginning at the cortex and ending in the cranial nerve nuclei. So it's not going to the muscle, so it doesn't qualify as a lower motor neuron. So it will be an upper motor neuron, right? Now, corticospinal, is it a upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron? Upper motor neuron, because it's coming from the cortex and staying in the spinal cord. So unless it goes to the skeletal muscle, we cannot call it a lower motor neuron, right? Lower motor neuron will begin, you see, sometimes as a loose term, we say spinal cord neuron, and to the muscle, that we call lower motor neuron. If we use that definition, technically we will be wrong because this lower motor neuron is not coming even from the spinal cord. It is coming from the brainstem. So to be on the safe side, brainstem is a part of central nervous system. Spinal cord is a part of central nervous system, right? So to be on the safe side, we say any neuron that begin in the CNS and end up in the neuromuscular junction or going to a skeletal muscle to control the muscle, that one we will call lower motor neuron. Okay? Are you clear about it? Okay. So I wonder if I want to go because they are okay. So this is, we talk about this one. So look at this one, the difference. It began at the cortex, right? Oh, what is this one coming? See, it began in the cortex. Following the same route as the lateral corticospinal. Only difference is in the medulla. This is medulla. They, instead of moving to the opposite side, they stay in the same side, and they eventually end up in the anterior white column of the spinal cord. We call them anterior corticospinal. And then you see, if their muscle is in this level, at this level they will cross. They will cross at the level where they need to go to the muscle, or you can say at the level where they need to communicate with their or control their lower motor neuron. Okay, so that is the difference between anterior corticospinal and lateral corticospinal. Now, don't take it seriously anymore. I will talk about this in next class as well, just to give you a preview. Now, see, this is called corticonuclear or corticobulbar fibers. So corticonuclear coming from the cortex, and look at this one here. This is midbrain. This is pons. This is pons medulla. Medulla here. Medulla is still a part of brainstem, right? Now look at it end here. Now, can you call it a corticospinal? Can you call this corticospinal? Why not? why this is not a cortico? It's cortico for sure, right? There is no problem with cortico. Cortico is sure because it originates in the cortex. Why are you not calling it a corticospinal? Which area is this? Look at this one. This is medulla, right? This is medulla. Where the spinal cord began? Spinal cord began at the end of medulla. Medulla ends and spinal cord begins. Spinal cord is the continuation of the medulla. These fibers, they stopped at medulla. They didn't go any further down. So if they don't go any further below the medulla, can we call them corticospinal? Does it make sense? It doesn't make sense, right? So it began at the cortex, that's fine. The beginning is good, cortico. Now it is ending here in the medulla. Where does it end here? Now this one, the one that they show, it ends in the cranial nerve nucleus of 9. 9 is what? 9 is glossopharyngeal. So they end in the glossopharyngeal nerve nucleus. So which means we call them corticonuclear. Which nucleus is this? This one is particularly 9th nerve nucleus, but we don't want to specify them. We say any cranial nerve nucleus. So from cortex to cranial nerve nucleus, we call it corticonuclear. From cortex to spinal cord, corticospinal, right? Is it difficult? Should not be, right? See, we say corticospinal, cortex to spinal cord, corticonuclear, cortex to nucleus. So then you may ask question, which nucleus is what nucleus are you talking about? What is the nucleus? Nucleus is a collection of cell body, right? Where one neuron can end and another neuron can begin. So which means this is a collection of cell body. Corticonuclear means begin at the cortex and ending at the collection of cell body. Which nucleus are these? These are cranial nerve nucleus. Which are the cranial nerve that innervate skeletal muscle? One is hypoglossal nerve that innervate our tongue muscle. Like facial nerve that innervate our muscles of facial expression. Trigeminal nerve that innervate the muscles of mastication. You know, the muscle that we use for chewing, right? Or abducen nerve that control one of the eye muscle. Trochlear control one of the eye muscle. Oh, accessory that control the shoulder muscle, right? Trapezius and the sternocleidomastoid. They are innervated by, you don't have to remember that. But remember that some of the muscles are innervated by cranial nerve and their nuclei are all located within the brainstem. So their upper motor neuron will not go down any further below the medulla. That's why we cannot classify them as corticospinal. We call them corticonuclear. And lower motor neuron, where they will originate from, either they will originate from spinal cord or they will originate from brainstem. So to combine brainstem and spinal cord, what a common term that we use central nervous system, CNS, because CNS include brain and spinal cord. If we say CNS, we are safe, right? We say, oh, okay, it may come from anywhere from the CNS. What is the other end of the lower motor neuron? Other end is in the muscle. Now, you will see some text will say anterior horn cells, which means spinal cord cells, and to the muscle is lower motor neuron. Yes, in most of the cases that's true. But if I ask you, what is the facial nerve? Can you call it a corticospinal? That is a lower motor neuron, but that doesn't come all the way to the spinal cord, right? So that begin at the brainstem and go to the muscles of facial expression or muscles of mastication, like that. Okay. So these are the ones. So do you remember I said upper motor neuron can have cortical origin or they can have subcortical origin. Look at this one. So upper motor neuron can have two origin, cortical origin, right? Cortical origin include two, corticospinal and corticonuclear, right? Now let's see what does this one is another tract. I will talk about this tract not today. Just take it as a fun. You don't have to worry too much about it. Now look at this. This area is the midbrain, okay? Midbrain, very important area of the brain, midbrain. And this area, these are called colliculus, and this is the red nucleus here. The other one is colored, you cannot see. This is the red nucleus. Now, there are some very important tract or fiber, bundle of fibers that arise at the red nucleus, and they occupy, they come all the way to the spinal cord. So from the red nucleus to the spinal cord, we give them a name. You can, it doesn't sound, it sounds odd, right? Red spinal. It doesn't sound nice. So we call it rubrospinal tract. Now, tell me one thing. You don't have to write anything for this one because we'll talk about this one again. Now, these fibers, you see, coming from red nucleus, which is in the midbrain, and coming to the spinal cord, if I ask you to call it either a upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron, what will you call it? You will call it an upper motor neuron, or you want to call it a lower motor neuron? So who said upper motor neuron? Speak out. Okay, you won. So what about the rest of you? Other four? Speak out. Turn your mic on. Now we are in relaxation phase. We are not talking about anything serious. This is just so what about other four? I need an answer. Either upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron. Tell me something.
I think upper.
Good. 2, 3 more.
Upper.
Good. 3. So are you guys following them majority? What about the rest of you? 2 more answers. Now we already have majority, right? For upper.
I'll go with upper.
You go with upper with the majority? Or do you think
Yes.
it's really upper? Oh, good. Okay, so what is the last one? I want one more answer and then we'll see. Oh, okay. Anyway, we have the majority. 4 out of 5 call it upper. The ones who said upper, can you give me a logic? What is your point to call it an upper motor neuron? Why it is an upper motor neuron? Okay, let's talk about lower motor neuron. That will make it simple for us. We said for a neuron to qualify as a lower motor neuron, it should begin at the central nervous system, either brain or spinal cord, and then they will end up in the skeletal muscle. Is this fiber ending up in the skeletal muscle? No, it is staying in the spinal cord. So it doesn't qualify as a lower motor neuron. So automatically it will be an upper motor neuron, right? Now, other 2 upper motor neuron we talked so far, one was corticospinal and the other one was corticonuclear. Why they were corticospinal and corticonuclear? Because both of them, they begin at the cortex. Either they end in the spinal cord as a corticospinal, or they ended in the cranial nerve nuclei in the brainstem, corticonuclear. Both of them are upper motor neuron, right? Both of them have cortico at the beginning because they originated in the cortex. Now, does this one, the red nucleus, is it located in the cerebral cortex? No, it is below the cortex. This area is the midbrain. Midbrain is not a part of cerebral cortex. So this is not cortex. This is an area subcortical. You understand subcortical, right? Subcortical means below the cortex. So this one, even though this is an upper motor neuron, but its origin is not a cortical origin. So that's why we don't call it cortico. Other end is in the spinal cord. We cannot call it a corticospinal. Rather, so how we give the name corticospinal? From 2 ends, right? Cortex to spinal cord. And cortex to nucleus, we call corticonuclear. This one, if we tag 2 sides, one end is in the red nucleus, other end is in the spinal cord. So we call it rubrospinal. Now, this origin, is it a cortical origin? No, it is a subcortical origin. So this is an upper motor neuron with subcortical origin, right? Rubrospinal. spinal because it began at the red nucleus in the midbrain and it end up in the spinal cord. Now let's look at this one. You see, same, this is still the midbrain. This was red nucleus, right? If the tract began here and end up in the spinal cord, we would have called it rubrospinal. Now this is superior colliculus. Superior colliculus and inferior colliculus, these are the two areas in the midbrain. Together, we call them tectum. Tectum. Now, the tract or fibers that begin in the tectum and end in the spinal cord, we call it tectospinal tract. Tectospinal. Now, the tectospinal fibers, they are upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron? Upper motor neuron, good. So now this upper motor neuron, they originate in the cortex or their origin is subcortical?
Subcortical.
So wonderful, subcortical. Things are going well now, right? Good. So subcortical origin, right? But they are upper motor neuron. To be a lower motor neuron, they should begin from here and go to the muscle, right? If it begin from here and go to the muscle, we call it lower motor. This is a lower motor neuron, right? Lower, remember lower motor neuron, then we rest of it we will call upper motor neuron, right? Just to see if they qualify as a lower motor neuron. If they don't, we call it upper motor neuron. Okay. Now, this is pons, and this is also, you know, the upper part of the medulla, and this is spinal cord. So this is pons and this is medulla. In the pons and medulla, there is an area called a reticular formation. Very important area that keep us alert. They always send signal to the cerebral cortex to keep us alert. When we become sleepy, this area reduce sending signal. So our brain activity goes down and we become sleepy. Okay. Now, if you stimulate your brain with caffeine or something, you know, caffeine is good. You can do something, you know, weird. We don't want to get into that. So those will stimulate your reticular formation. So reticular formation will keep sending signal to your brain to keep you alert. Okay. So now those fibers that begin in the reticular formation of pons to the spinal cord, we call pontine reticulospinal. Reticular formation to spinal cord, reticulospinal tract. And reticulospinal tract, because reticular formation can be present in the pons or in medulla. If they are in the reticular formation of medulla and go to the spinal cord, we still call it reticulospinal. Now, reticulospinal can be of two types. Either they can begin at the pons, reticular formation of pons, we call it pontine reticulospinal, or they can begin in the medulla, reticular formation of medulla, we call them medullary reticular formation. Okay. Now, this tectospinal, pontine reticulospinal, medullary reticulospinal, these are all, what is common in them? They are all upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron? They are all upper motor neuron, right? Because they are not going to the muscle. They are staying in the spinal cord. They are all upper motor neuron. So they are all upper motor neurons. To be, as I said, to qualify as a lower motor neuron, they need to go all the way to the muscle. Okay, either from spinal cord or from brainstem to the muscle. Final pathway, that is lower motor neuron. Other than that, everything coming from either from the cortex or subcortical area, they are all upper motor neuron. Let me show you an example here. Okay, so this one is coming from the cortex and going down, okay, and it's decussating here, right? So what is this one here? Which tract is this?
Cerebrospinal.
Which one?
Coracospinal.
Wonderful, corticospinal. Now, among the corticospinal, there are two types, lateral and anterior. Which one is this?
Lateral.
Wonderful, good. Lateral. Why? Because 2 points we see in favor of your answer. One is, you see fibers, it's not very easy to see, but here this is medulla, right? Medulla, and see they are going on the other side. We call it pyramidal decussation, right? pyramidal decussation. They decussate at the pyramid. Number one is they decussate in the pyramid that make them lateral corticospinal. And finally, they are occupying the lateral column of the spinal cord, which means they are lateral corticospinal. Wonderful, very good. Now, this one begin in the cortex. How far down it is going? It is going to the, where is it? Spinal cord, right? What is this one? Cortico. Which tract is this? Look at its origin. Where it's originate in the cortex. How far did it go? To the spinal cord, which means it is a corticospinal for sure. Now, the question is, if we say corticospinal, then we have two choices, either anterior or lateral. Can anybody tell me whether this is anterior or lateral corticospinal? Tell me.
Is it anterior?
Oh, wonderful. It's anterior because it is located in the anterior white column of the spinal cord, number one. And another very important, point in your favor, that you see fibers are going through the medulla without crossing. If it was lateral corticospinal, they would have crossed around here. They would have decussated in the pyramid, right? They didn't do pyramidal decussation. They stayed in the same side and they occupy the anterior white column, compared to this one. This is occupying the lateral white column. This is the anterior white column. So corticospinal, and this one is anterior. This is also corticospinal. This is lateral. Now, tell me about this one. Is it a cortico? No, it's not cortico. It's subcortical origin, right? Origin is here. So you don't know it. So let me give you a tip. This is the midbrain. And we said this rounded area, what we called it, this structure, we call it red nucleus, right? Red nucleus. From red nucleus to the spinal cord is, you don't have to remember it. It's a rubrospinal. You have to remember it, but I talked about it today, so I don't expect you to know it at this point. And this one is coming from the superior colliculus, also in the midbrain. We said we call this area tectum. And from tectum to the spinal cord, what do you call it?
Tectospinal.
Tectospinal, wonderful. Now, do you see any lower motor neuron in these four? These four are all upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron, or some upper, some lower?
All upper.
Oh, good, wonderful. So now let me go back. We are done actually. So I just want to make sure that you got the upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron things right. So then if we go back to this one, okay. We said we have upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron, two types, right? Upper motor neuron have two origins, can be cortical origin or subcortical origin. And the last slide, we saw two cortical origin and two subcortical origin. Cortical origins are corticospinal, and they are of two types, anterior and lateral. And then corticonuclear, which I didn't show the corticonuclear in the last slide, they are also upper motor neuron. And subcortical origins are, example of subcortical origin but upper motor neuron, they are rubrospinal, right? Tectospinal, pontine and medullary reticulospinal. They are all, and there are others actually, I will talk about those as well. Say like there are vestibulospinal, they are very important as well. Okay, so I don't want to go any further. Actually, in the next class, I will talk a little bit more about the pyramidal tract or corticospinal tract, how they travel, because that is absolutely important for us to know. And I will touch over the upper motor and lower motor neuron things as well. So any question, do you have any question from these things that we talked today? We didn't talk too many serious stuffs, right? Only a few things you need to remember. Where they begin, where they end, how this motor things perform. Just you see, this is not something, as a graduate student, you don't have to just memorize things and regurgitate in the exam. That's not something we want. We want you to have a good understanding of the concept. From the whole today's about hour and a half, if you are clear about the corticospinal, why we call them corticospinal, some of them we call corticonuclear, some, you see, if you get that, I'm happy. If you say I have a good understanding of what is the upper motor neuron and I have a good understanding what is the lower motor neuron, I would say congratulations, you did a good job. Okay. So that's all. I will see you on Thursday if you don't have any question. Any question that you have? No questions?
No.
No? Are we done? No? You see, I ask you whether you have a question. You say no. Say, are we done? You are not giving me permission to go. So, I cannot even stop the meeting. I cannot go because I'm not sure.
I think we're okay.
Okay, you guys, you think you are okay. Good. So are we good to go now?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. You guys are so kind. Thank you so much. I will see you on Thursday. And again, we will not change. I don't think the campus will be under, inclement weather or not. But even if do you remember what the UMS did last Monday? It was an absolute inclement weather. Actually, they didn't call it Monday. No, on Tuesday, they called it on Wednesday. That was very strange. Anyway, so Thursday, it doesn't matter whether the campus operates under inclement weather or not. The exam will not be on Thursday. Thursday will be another lecture on the motor system. And the following Tuesday will be your exam, and it will be at the same time in the same room. The room, I haven't get the confirmation yet, but I'm pretty certain that we will get the confirmation for that room. So it is room 205, 207 in the Biomed 1. You're familiar with Biomed 1, right? Oh, good, good. Okay, thank you so much. I will see you guys on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.